At a towering skyscraper, there was a young man who wanted to fly without wings. Under normal circumstances, he could only be a child of stone. But this world was different. There were humans who surpassed mankind itself, possessing power that escaped the accumulated understanding humans had built over thousands of years. He was one of them, and even when faced with a military armed to the teeth, ordered to empty entire magazines of bullets, they could do nothing to him. Even tanks, the weapons that act like fathers on the battlefield, whose presence brings helplessness to every opponent, were nothing before this young man. A single sweep of his hand, and they were destroyed. After that wave of destruction, he still sat leisurely atop the sky-piercing skyscraper. The military, after repeated defeats, sent out helicopters to join the fight. He merely snapped his fingers once, and aircraft after aircraft plunged to the ground all at once. It seemed that against transcendent beings, the current human civilization still lacked the strength to fight back. But strangely, despite easily annihilating every enemy before him, he not only refused to keep playing father to the government, but instead surrendered with his hands tied and let the state carry him away. The existence of superhumans like the white-haired kid just now was far from rare, so common in fact that people had built an entire prison for Spurs, entities who were not ordinary humans. Here there was a full array of devices that emitted sound waves to suppress those with superpowers, and thanks to this, an ordinary person with a single gun could overpower an Esper. The prisoners locked inside had nothing to amuse themselves with and often organized betting matches, and this time the participant was Andy, someone considered an ordinary Esper because he had no special ability at all. His opponent was a tall, large man, the difference in their physiques so great that anyone could tell Andy was walking into this with ice-cold feet. Yet strangely, the outcome turned out completely different. In the middle of the fight, a flash of light gleamed in Andy's eyes, and from there he found his opening and knocked his opponent out in a single blow. This unbelievable victory was not his first either, it was already Andy's 7th in a row. After the match ended, the prisoners gathered to welcome a new member. It was none other than the white-haired young man Hayabu. Even falling into this situation, Hayabu showed no fear at all, but instead strolled in leisurely as if walking into his own home. This attitude of his irritated the bastard who followed the warden, who came over to throw a punch, and Hayabu badly wanted to deal with this guy too. But they had already increased the concentration of sound waves in the prison to suppress him. The soldiers also immediately raised their guns, and amid the frightened prisoners, Andy stepped out to intervene. After all, he was just a kid, no need to make such a fuss. This intervention did not ease the situation, and it landed Andy in solitary confinement together with Hayabu. With time on their hands, the two of them talked with each other. Andy looked at Hayabu, still a student yet already joining the criminal organization Pandra. Did he want a reputation that badly? Hayabu surprised Andy even more when it turned out he was not an ordinary member, but the very boss of this organization. After hearing this, Andy remarked that if he ever got out, he would gladly join Hayabu's organization. He only thought of it as a joke, not knowing that it was the very thing that set so much in motion. During the next meal, Hayabu noticed a cafeteria worker deliberately slipping poison into his food. He did not eat it but pushed it over to Andy. Andy, completely unaware, ate it down ravenously, and then in the next fight, Andy felt his body acting very strangely. Forget about using his power. Even moving and throwing punches became unusually difficult. In his weakened state, Andy took every punch without dodging a single one. His jaw teeth nearly merged into one. It was not until Hayabu came over and told him the truth that Andy realized he had been set up. Hayabu had done it on purpose so that Andy would be taken to the hospital, the only chance for prisoners to escape from here. That was the rumor anyway, but when Andy woke up he found everything very out of the ordinary. This place was not a hospital, but a room for dissecting Espers. Had Hayabu not come along, he truly would have died without ever knowing it. The two of them stepped out of the operating room, walked along the corridor, and entered a spacious room, in the middle of which stood a glass cage, and inside it a bed draped with a curtain. Seeing that sight made Hayabu uneasy, and he snatched Andy's gun and fired all around the room. Only when the bullets ran out did soldiers come pouring in. Hayabu wasted no words and swept his hand to send them flying. Then he approached the cage in the middle, which held a little girl prisoner. Right at that moment, the camp commander also arrived. Only now did he understand that Hayabu had let himself be captured here on purpose to save someone. He was not afraid of Hayabu, but instead grew excited at having a new test subject. The moment he finished speaking, beside the commander appeared a tall, hulking figure with skin unlike a normal person's, 2 arms of uneven size, sharp teeth, and horns on its head. One glance and you could tell it was a product grafted from the cells of his spurs. Seeing one of his own kind turned into this form, Hayabu immediately struck to free his opponent. But the moment his attack reached the mutant, it vanished, as if there were a wall blocking the way before him. The opponent was quick as lightning, his whole body crackling with electric sparks as he lunged straight at Hayabu, who flew up to dodge, and the opponent gave chase, his hands unleashing high-pressure blasts of air as attacks. Those air blasts looked small, but their power when striking the walls was astonishing. Hayabu tried to dodge, stretching the distance to make use of his long-range attack abilities. But the mutant was too fast, and the moment Hayabu shifted position, the opponent caught up. He possessed both extrasensory perception and the power to predict the future, and Hayabu could do nothing but passively absorb the opponent's waves of attacks. In the end, Hayabu was struck down to the ground, and Andy, seeing that, opened fire on one side to buy time. Hayabu used that moment to go inside and check on the little girl, whose condition showed nothing wrong, but there were tubes attached to her body that began to make Hayabu uneasy. When he stood up and returned to the battlefield once more, Hayabu took out a badge and then turned it in reverse to release his limiter. The words had barely left him when a multicolored aura radiated around Hayabu, and the pressure he now gave off was utterly different from before. Hayabu's footsteps were as heavy as a sledgehammer crashing down, shattering the ground. With just a casual flick of his hand, the mutant before him was smashed against the wall and then flung up to the ceiling. Finally, his entire body suddenly burst into pieces, with chunks of slimy flesh splattering in every direction. Out of that pile of flesh crawled a squirrel that could speak human language, and the little girl knew it. Having dealt with the mutant, Hayabu then blew up the entire base, the tyrannical prison that specifically targeted his spurs. After everything, Hayabu once again sealed away his power. The battle had just ended when he snapped his fingers forward, and the whole space shattered like broken shards of glass. It was an ultra-advanced cloaking technology. Behind it was an enormous submarine, and Hayabu spoke to Andy about his earlier promise to join. A man with balls should keep his word. The imprisoned Espers were also rescued. From then on, Andy became a member of the most dangerous and notorious Esper criminal organization in the world. Of course, there were those who were suspicious of Andy's identity, but Hayabu let it slide for the time being, and for some reason he seemed very pleased with Andy, brushing aside the warning of Magi, someone renowned for being careful and precise in his judgment. Andy was introduced to the core members, and as for his ability, his power was to nullify all SP, and Hayabu did not just say it, but had the squirrel attack on purpose. A gust of wind rushed straight forward only to suddenly stop before Andy and vanish, as if it had never existed. Some thought it was a powerful defensive ability, but Hayabu said it was SP nullification. And to be more certain, he had Yujiri, who had the ability to read thoughts, try to probe Andy's mind. The result was that nothing was gained, and instead a feeling of pain shot back into Yujiri's head. Because he nullified SP, Espers near Andy usually felt uncomfortable. From then on, everyone looked at him with a disdain worse than racism. Andy too realized that his days ahead looked hard to live through. After the introduction, Magi lent Andy a set of clothes to put on just to look sharp. Nothing more useful than that. This was the ship of the most dangerous criminal organization in the world. Yet it had quite a few children aboard, which left Andy puzzled to no end. Did these people spare no one, not the young nor the old? Magi explained that because they were Espers, even their parents did not want them and cast them aside, which was why Pandra brought them here. Learning this gave Andy a different view of them. It seemed the Hayabu crowd not only wreaked havoc on heaven and earth, but also did good deeds. After Magi finished speaking and left, Andy met yet another person, whose voice seemed to come from inside Andy's own head. Generally speaking, he meant nothing good either. He came here only to torment Andy. After finishing his business here, Andy secretly slipped into a dark corner where no one could see him and made a call to report the current situation to his superiors. Andy was indeed no ordinary person. He was a government investigator who had infiltrated this place to investigate Pandra's lair, helping them sweep up this whole nest in one go. On Magi's side, he had looked through the personnel file and conducted real investigation, and all the information obtained matched up, except for a few things that were slightly unusual. Magi wanted Hayabu to give him more time to investigate, but Hayabu ignored it, saying that Andy would take part in the upcoming operation. This would be the best test. As Hayabu said, everyone boarded a small boat together and went into a city on the mainland. The organization had goods stashed here, and at first Andy saw nothing amiss. They were just ordinary goods, daily necessities that could be found anywhere. Yet it was only a disguise. The true value of this shipment was the pile of weapons hidden behind it. That was the thing to be traded. On the way back, Magi suddenly stirred, and a wing sprouted from his back as he flew up into the air. Without a word, Magi raided a building, and his target was no ordinary person either but an Esper, and he was struck back by his opponent and sent flying, his whole body slamming into the building. Perhaps this trade would not be able to go as usual. The rest of the group on the boat also sprang into action. The blue-haired girl with the ability to teleport carried people off to fight, and the young man with the ability to project his voice joined the battle too. He stood in a corner screaming, his mouth continuously emitting sound waves that made his opponent's ears ache, their heads as if about to explode. The girl with the teleportation ability was even stranger. She clapped her hands forward and smashed her opponent into the wall. A giant handprint pressed into it as well. In that chaotic battlefield, Andy stood in place unaffected, his mind unchanging amid the ever-shifting crowd. When the battle ended, Hayabu still decided to meet the subject of this trade. That person was no stranger but an old friend of Hayabu's, both of them having once served in the military. Andy received the order to observe from afar with a sniper rifle, and when Hayabu gave the command to shoot him down, a traitor must die. When the two sides met, Andy held the gun with sweat pouring down his whole body, unable to believe that there would be a day he would kill someone. Thanks to the young man controlling sound waves behind him, he could hear the conversation inside. Hayabu and the other man had once been comrades serving in the military. Hayabu might look young, but he was actually on par in age with that old man. It was only thanks to the intervention of ISP and gene enhancement that he could remain as young as he was now. Looking at them, no one would ever think they were born in the same era. Hayabu at first even reminisced about old times with his opponent, until he received information that the man before him seemed to have reached some kind of agreement with the government. He signaled Andy to shoot. Andy hesitated and simply could not pull the trigger, when something strange suddenly happened in the room, as a whole row of people collapsed all at once. Hayabu abruptly appeared behind Andy and remarked, just as expected, he was still soft-hearted. Hayabu flicked his hand toward Andy, and nothing happened at all. This time Andy's role was not to kill. Hayabu only wanted to test the operating range of his ability. As for the people in that room, they were nothing but robots, and the real man was right there in the building where Andy had been lying in wait. And he too was a high-level Esper who intended to use his power to kill everyone. It was only Andy's presence that prevented him from using his power as he wished, and his plan fell apart from there. The moment Hayabu finished speaking, a tremor came from afar, and Andy covered his head with his hands and waited. But nothing happened, because Hayabu had raised his hand to block it. He once again released his power and swept his hand to attack, and the building the old man was in shook violently, and then came crashing down. That whole plot of land instantly turned into a heap of rubble, and the towering building from moments ago vanished in an instant. Hayabu, a man who had returned from death with a bullet hole in his head, was not only powerful but also possessed an unbelievable wit and intelligence. Hardly anyone could match a man like him. After this operation, everyone in Pandra began to open up more toward Andy, no longer keeping their distance, but instead actively coming over to strike up conversations. Looking at the harmonious atmosphere on the ship, so different from when they fought, Andy felt it was truly strange. Was this really a criminal organization? They looked more like relatives from a family who had not seen each other in a long time. Gathering together for a trip would be the more fitting description. One might think that in this world everyone hated or even despised Espers, but not in the kingdom of Monarch. Princess Sophie was renowned for her pacifism. She not only protected ordinary citizens, but also fought to create opportunities for Espers to enjoy full rights in her nation. That was why, on the anniversary celebration, Sophie invited quite a few Esper organizations to discuss upcoming plans, hoping that conflicts between ordinary people and Espers would no longer occur so frequently in the future. Among them were two people, Minamoto and Sakaki, who came from Japan. At first, they were rather looking forward to what would happen at today's gathering, until they saw the presence of Hayabu. Hayabu's reputation was known to everyone in the Esper world. Wherever he was there was trouble, a man who lost to a leopard in everything but the name. The two of them even grew so agitated that it nearly led to a clash with Hayabu, even though he had said he came here just to hang out. with no intention of wreaking havoc. Sakaki still did not believe it, growing so worked up that he grabbed Hayabu's collar and hauled him up. And it was not until Andy's group moved in to surround them that Sakaki realized he could not let things go too far and let go. One would think that would be the end of it. But as Hayabu left, he suddenly snapped his fingers, and the lights backstage abruptly went completely dark. When they came back on, people saw written on the wall the words "Pandra has been here." Just this message alone was enough to frighten everyone, and Minamoto did not believe that Hayabu had only come to scare people. So he and Sakaki went straight to the leadership room, wanting to know what was going on. At first they were refused entry, until it was learned that the two came from an organization that specialized in opposing Pandra. Indeed, Hayabu had not simply come to turn off the lights. He had taken Princess Sophie away. The leadership at first wanted to keep this information hidden, but now it seemed that was no longer possible. Sakaki suddenly produced a USB drive, for when he had deliberately picked a fight with Hayabu, he had used his quick hands and sharp eyes to pluck it out with a two-fingered move. Now all they had to do was look at this and everyone could learn Pandra's purpose in this operation. From afar, Hayabu saw that scene and smiled, and he did not explain much to Sophie, only telling her that he would absolutely not harm her, and to rest easy and stay here. Hayabu had not even wanted to lay a hand on Sophie. From start to finish, it had all been at Yujiri's request. Although Sophie did not understand her current situation, in her eyes, the people here did not look like criminals who did nothing but eat and commit crimes all day. She even offered to invite everyone to stay and serve under her. Hayabu and the others of course declined. On Minamoto's side, after watching the USB, they roughly understood that Sophie would be assassinated during today's ceremony. Pandra had come only to prevent this from happening. As for who was behind it, the group could not yet know, and to find out they would have to decrypt the code in the USB. The story was this: Yujiri, through her ability to predict the future, had seen the scene of Sophie being shot dead, and the little girl immediately told Hayabu to save Sophie. From the day the two had first met until now, this was the first time Yujiri had spoken up to ask for help, and Hayabu could not sit still, so he had no choice but to act. Right at that moment, Sophie stepped in from outside, expressing that she wanted to take Yujiri out to play, because the little girl had said she had never been able to go for a walk. Hearing this, Andy immediately objected. The situation was far too dangerous right now. Hayabu was different. He came up with a brilliant idea based on Sophie's suggestion. A little later, people saw Princess Sophie strolling about all over the city. This not only left Minamoto's group bewildered, the terrorists fell into the same situation. Thanks to this, you found their location, and Momoji and Meiji struck out to beat the whole lot of them down. After that, the two acted as if they did not know someone was eavesdropping, and deliberately let Sophie's location slip. The terrorists had been waiting for just that and sent people to the known location, never imagining that Hayabu was inside, having waited for them all along. The real Sophie was indeed out strolling the streets with Yujiri, with Andy following behind. He asked why it had to be him, and Hayabu explained that only Andy had the ability to tell which was the real Sophie. No one was more suitable than him. A little later, the two arrived at a newly built orphanage, which was why there was no one inside yet. It was also upon arriving here that Sophie remembered that once before, during a visit to an orphanage, she had met Yujiri, a little girl whose name she had not even managed to learn before she vanished. It was precisely because she was a good leader, and because of that earlier meeting, that she was able to avoid the accident this time. Truly, when you live well, even if the gods do not bless you, others will look out for you. Switching over to Minamoto's side, Sakaki was playing a game. Not because he was addicted, but because, to obtain the final piece of information in the USB, they had to beat the game inside it. As he played, Sakaki shouted and cursed like an immature brat, and at one point he even wanted to smash the keyboard. Because what kind of game was it that had traps right at the very first spawn point? So what the hell was the point of playing? But this matter was of grave importance, and without knowing who intended to assassinate Sophie, she would not truly be safe. To make humans and Aspers able to coexist, Sophie was an indispensable piece of the puzzle. That was why Sakaki was being so patient. Outside, Minamoto, watching him die who knew how many times, also grew frustrated and wanted to jump in and play. After a stretch of chaos like that, the two finally beat the game exactly as the USB required. They quickly plugged it into the computer and saw a flood of baffling information. There was no data among it pointing to any individual or group of suspects in the plot to assassinate Sophie. The leadership even wanted to stop Minamoto from viewing the data. because it was all national operational documents. Minamoto at first was angry, then after thinking it over carefully, he figured out the real culprit behind it all. On Andy's side, while Sophie was asking Yujiri whether she wanted to stay with her, an officer came over and told her to stay away from those Aspers. His words carried the sense of protection, yet his hand drew a gun and fired straight at her. Luckily, Andy rushed over in time to take that bullet, and having missed the first shot, the man wanted to strike again. This guy was resentful that Sophie was spending money to build an international support fund for Aspers instead of developing the country, developing national defense so he could have the chance to skim off it. Seeing Sophie in danger, Yujiri wanted to unleash her power and kill him. And right at that moment Hayabu arrived and stopped her. Things like this he did not want the little girl to do, and Hayabu casually flicked his hand and the man was knocked down, unable to get back up. From here everything came to an end, Sophie was safe, and the mastermind behind it all had been found. With the business in Monarch done, for some reason Hayabu decided to return to Japan to meet the one he called the Queen. This also meant they were entering dangerous territory, the place where Babel, Pandra's main rival, operated most powerfully. This move was no different from poking a sleeping dog. But Hayabu was not afraid of anyone's father or son, welcoming whoever came and smashing whoever clashed with him. On Andy's side, he again called his superiors to report on everything he had been through, including the recent Monarch incident. The man urged Andy to quickly carry out the planned operation. They had poured a great deal of money, effort, and manpower into this plan. Finding Andy, the one deemed especially suitable, could not be allowed to fail, and it had also consumed an enormous amount of resources. He absolutely must not fail. So on that day, Andy went sneaking about furtively, looking no different from a thief trying to slip into important areas where only core members were allowed to set foot. But he truly did not know the way. This ship was incredibly vast, and the security system was no trivial thing either. One slip of carelessness, and you would be discovered just like that. Just as he was thinking this, Yu's warning rang out from afar. He came over with Yujiri, reminding Andy that this was not an area just anyone could enter, and to leave this place quickly. Before Andy could even explain why he had come in here, the whole ship suddenly shook violently. That was because they had run into Babel's special unit, the Children, the organization's Esper combat force. They were not adults, just 3 young girls with extraordinary power and brilliant combat ability. With just 2 of them infiltrating the ship, they beat the other Espers before they could react, who could only stand helpless and take it, get subdued, and then be teleported into Babel's holding cells. The one commanding the operation on the other side of the battle line was none other than Minamoto, and they not only wanted to capture the ordinary Espers, but also the whole high-level lot like Magi. Sakaki was far away setting up a large trap, and as long as the ship moved into it, Hayabu's group would find it hard to escape. Under normal circumstances, Hayabu alone was more than capable of wiping out all of the opponent's Espers, but Babel had one person who was no ordinary figure, Kaoru, a young girl with an immensely powerful ability. One could say not inferior to Hayabu at all. She was precisely the girl Hayabu called the Queen, and Hayabu was forced to fight Kaoru fiercely up in the air, so the people below on the ship could only fend for themselves. Although Kaoru was young and smaller than Hayabu, she did not fall to a disadvantage in the slightest during the fight. She not only traded blows, but also defended against unpredictable attacks, while frequently changing the property of her opponent's powers. In certain situations, Kaoru even drove Hayabu into a weak position and pushed him back. Below on the ship, Andy and Yu quickly reacted and ran out to face the 2 warriors who had charged in. Yu used his power to launch Sound forward, but the girl named Aoi possessed the ability to manipulate space with a fairly fast movement speed. And Aoi not only dodged the blow, but also casually sent Yu flying with a single strike. Seeing that, Andy threw the squirrel to distract the opponent, then activated his ESP nullification ability and projected it forward to subdue Aoi. He was warning her that if she resisted he would use harsher measures, when someone stepped out from the dark corner, and she used an electric stun gun to bind Andy tight. Just like that, he was subdued by the opponent. The 2 of them were also extremely curious about Andy's ability. After a bit of testing, they learned that as long as they kept a certain distance from Andy, their superpowers would work as usual. Through a keychain on the squirrel, they used it to enter the control cabin. Magi's group detected intruders but could not react in time and were quickly subdued by the opponent. Having stabilized the situation here, The two girls did not capture everyone but placed a strange device on the ship's control system and then hurriedly left. Seeing that, Kaoru lost her appetite for battle and turned back. Inside the control cabin, everyone realized they could no longer steer the ship as before. It was heading toward where Sakaki had laid his trap. To keep the whole group from being carried off by Babel, Hayabu had to get a little serious. He brought Andy to the opponent's location, first carrying out a rescue of the group captured earlier. But before he could do anything, he was discovered and surrounded by the three young girls. Hayabu had to deal with them and sent Andy out to make his own way back to the ship. Who would have thought someone was already waiting outside? And in her hand was the device controlling Pandra's ship. Watching the ship leave, Andy could only sigh, trying to put on an air of harmlessness before charging in to attack. But she reacted in time, teleporting behind him to kick him, and making use of her ESP advantage, she controlled the objects around her from afar to attack, leaving Andy on the back foot with no choice but to run. This woman looked ordinary, but her true identity was the leader of Babel, and Andy had been thoroughly briefed before the mission. She was in a spur on the scale of Hayabu, so he would be winning on faith alone. Luckily, at the critical moment, Magi's group used a missile attack that made the ship shake violently. Andy fell into the water, and seizing a moment when she was not paying attention, he lunged up and grabbed her. An ordinary Esper had only one ability, but Andy had two. His second ISP was that when he touched a person, he could completely seal that target's power for a certain period of time. Thanks to this, Andy was able to defeat her and reclaim control of the ship for Magi. Right at that moment, Minamoto came over with a gun pointed straight at Andy, who stood in place pretending to surrender. And when the opponent let his guard down, he kicked the control device to throw Minamoto off, then lunged forward and knocked Minamoto's gun away. Even without his weapon, Minamoto could still face off directly against Andy, and the two had a brief clash in which neither could do anything to the other before pulling back. Suddenly, the ship shook hard, and Andy seized the chance to jump into the sea. And right then Hayabu flew over, grabbed Andy, and returned to the ship. Even though things were not going smoothly, Babel still did not give up. They released the seal on the three girls, letting them use their power to drag the ship into the trap. Seeing that, Hayabu flew up into the air and stood before the ship, releasing his seal and using his power to face off against the children. The two sides' powers clashed fiercely, and the surrounding seawater, affected by the pressure, pressed in tightly upon itself, forming a great column of water in midair. The harder the three, including Kaoru, pushed, the more they showed signs of strain, and then they were driven back a stretch, losing their grip on control of Pandra's ship. But it still carried its momentum and rushed into Babel's trap. Just as Minamoto's group was anticipating Hayabu's group being caught, the whole ship was enveloped in a beam of light and then flew up into the air, crossing over the trap that Babel had painstakingly prepared. Before everyone's eyes, a crack appeared in the sky ahead, and Hayabu's group departed through it. Babel's operation failed in an unbelievable fashion. They lost right on their own home turf. After that earth-shaking confrontation, Hayabu still did not leave Japan, but went straight to Tokyo. Even as Japan's Esper agencies hunted him harder than dog thieves, Andy's group operated separately from Hayabu, and they were all strolling the streets admiring the cherry blossoms. It was the first time Yujiri had ever seen such a beautiful flower, and the petals swaying and falling in the wind truly created a scene that stirred the heart. Momoji told Yujiri to take her time and look closely. After all, everyone had plenty of time here. Only Andy did not understand. They had just fought a battle bloody enough to leave them battered. This should be the moment for the whole group to be hiding in some corner instead of wandering around out in the open. You looked at Andy the way you would look at a chick whose feathers had just grown in. If they did not go out shopping, were the people on the ship supposed to eat crap to get by? Andy understood even less. If that was the case, then pick fast and buy quick. What kind of internationally wanted criminal gang was as chill as Pandra? You went on to explain, they had to wait for everything to settle down before they could continue working. In short, today was just for having fun. While Andy's group bickered, Hayabu had to go repair the ship and then carry out a mysterious deal. That was the story anyway. But who would have known he was sneaking into Babel's headquarters? As a super-class Esper, Hayabu easily walked right in and used their technology to examine his own body. That was the reason Hayabu could live long and stay as young as he was now. Switching over to Andy's side, everyone was still strolling the streets very happily, and Momoji suggested a few cute items for Yujiri to buy, when the little girl suddenly grew uncomfortable and walked off. Everyone turned to look at Andy all at once, only he could follow Yujiri, so disregarding the Lolacan label, Andy was forced to follow her. The little girl walked to a shrine, stopped in front of a place selling charms, and stared fixedly at a charm for safety. Yujiri's eyes sank because she wanted to buy something but realized she had no money. Luckily, right at that moment Andy came over, and from then on Yujiri's eyes grew brighter than ever. After buying Yujiri the charm, Andy was explaining to her not to just wander off like that, because now he did not know the way back to where they had been. Yujiri heard it like wind passing through her ears, paying no attention as she stared fixedly at the amusement park. Andy saw that too, and without a word, it was obvious how badly the little girl wanted to go inside. So Andy bought tickets, and although there was a sign outside forbidding Aspers from entering, to him it was nothing. He only had to use his power to seal Yujiri's ESP and it was done. Andy led the girl inside without knowing that someone behind them was secretly watching him. Inside, Yujiri really did play very happily, getting to experience rides she had never been able to try before. Andy was like an old father, watching from afar, and occasionally he joined in the rides too to ensure Yujiri's safety. When they reached the circus viewing area, Andy told Yujiri to just sit here and watch. He would go buy her a drink. On the way, Andy deliberately wove around a few times and walked into a hidden corner, waiting for the watcher to reveal himself so he could cut off his path. The one who had been following him turned out, unexpectedly, to be Minamoto of Babel, and with him was Babel's director. What Minamoto wanted to say was a request for Andy to act as an inside informant within Pandora to help capture Hayabu. The reason he could say this so confidently was that he had discovered Andy was an investigator from America. Through one brief moment of combat, Minamoto had recognized it as their hand-to-hand technique. Andy was a little surprised, but what could anyone do to him with such flimsy information? On the contrary, Andy figured that if he pretended to be an inside informant and then fed information to Pandora, things might turn out better for him. Fujiko beside him then threatened, in that case she would simply send word straight into Pandora's team that there was an informant, and either way Andy would fall under suspicion. At this point, Andy had no choice but to give in, and he began to ask why Babel kept targeting Hayabu like this. Fujiko asked whether Andy surely knew about the time when the world was still in chaos, when Aspers back then were used as weapons on the most important battlefronts. At the moment the war ended, the Aspers were turned against and purged by their superiors. In his rage, Hayabu had killed many leaders and comrades, and from then on he too lost his faith in the organizations meant to protect Aspers. Many members of Babel had died at Hayabu's hands, yet Fujiko and Minamoto were not angry enough over it to want him dead. They wanted to capture Hayabu almost for his own sake. On Yujiri's side, when the circus performance ended, Yujiri saw a little boy who had been separated from his parents and was crying. Yujiri felt a little sorry for him and used her psychic ability to then find the boy's parents for him. It was precisely because of this that the little girl's identity as an Asper was exposed, and instead of thanking her, the boy's parents shunned her and went off to tell others. Yujiri began to grow uneasy as she saw the people around her following her with hostile, angry, and hateful eyes. 2 security guards came up and grabbed Yujiri, and in that moment the little girl lost control and unleashed her power, releasing illusions over a wide area. The whole amusement park in an instant turned into a hellish underworld, surrounded by demons and ghosts that left everyone terrified and running away. Andy's group, noticing the disturbance from afar, quickly ran over. And at the moment Yujiri was about to release even more illusions, Andy made it over in time to seal her power, and the crowd around them, after the panic, only grew angrier as they looked toward the little girl. Andy did not reproach her, only encouraging Yujiri that she had done nothing wrong, self-defense was always justified. From there Yujiri burst into tears. Yu's group quickly appeared too, and Magi, observing the surroundings and understanding the current situation, told Andy to shut off his power so Momoji could take the whole group away. Back on the ship, Momoji told Yujiri that all the family members were here so she had nothing to worry about, and the little girl ran off just like that to play with the others. Although he had not been on the ship long, Andy heard the people here use the word family a great deal. Momoji explained that everyone here was a child Hayabu had picked up and raised. He himself had also created an environment safe enough for Aspers to live and grow up with peace of mind. That was why, when Aspers abandoned by their own relatives called this their family, it was not wrong at all. Today was Hayabu's birthday, which was why everyone had gone strolling and bought quite a few things in preparation for Hayabu's birthday. Andy was the only one who did not know, so he had no gift, and everyone forced him to kneel down and apologize. Luckily, they were only joking and did not mean it. Looking at this scene, Andy wondered, a man warm and gentle, or one who killed without blinking, and without the slightest hesitation, which was the real Hayabu. The next day, Andy received orders from his superiors, who began urging him to quickly seize the catastrophe, the name of Pandra's ship. At the same time, Magi also briefed everyone on the next operation. Hayabu wanted to steal an Ecom device, a technology that could nullify Asper's ESP. You suggested simply destroying the thing outright to be quick and tidy, but this mission was not that simple. Hayabu would steal the thing, and from it research a technology that would let humans suppress most Aspers. That was the true purpose. Receiving 2 missions at once left Andy momentarily not knowing what to do. He was still torn over whether he should help the government seize the catastrophe. Because Pandra did not look like the criminal gang everyone knew, Andy wanted to learn more information about the organization in order to make his decision. First was the conflict between Pandra and Babel, and the first connection was Kaoru, the one Hayabu had chosen as queen for the Aspers of the future. This ship had a room with an empty throne that no one sat on, and Hayabu was preparing it for her. Andy intended to ask more about Babel's difficulties when the organization was first founded, which surely had a connection to Hayabu, but no one here dared talk about that matter, telling Andy that if he wanted to know anything he should go ask Hayabu himself. He would not dare, so he let it go. Right at that moment, Yujiri could not sleep, so she came out looking for Hayabu to read her a story. Hayabu was not here, and Yujiri looked over at Andy, and without a word it was obvious she had chosen him. So Andy had to play nanny, and once Yujiri was asleep, Andy went to the library to return the book. He unexpectedly discovered a photo with Hayabu and the children of Babel in it. Right then Hayabu came over too, and from a cabinet he took out a diary, and the moment it was opened, a figure appeared. It was Utsumi, someone who had died and whom Hayabu had preserved in the form of a ghost. He did not say much, but showed Utsumi the blueprint of the catastrophe's core. After looking it over, Utsumi understood. This ship's abilities to camouflage and teleport were all because its core had been built from the consciousness of a living person. That was Igo, who was also a friend of them both. For some reason, Hayabu remarked offhandedly to Utsumi that if there ever came a day he died, Utsumi should continue to protect the ship. A ship created on a dead person and protected by the dead. Utsumi was about to tell Hayabu he was being too pessimistic when he sensed someone eavesdropping and swung out an attack. When the two of them stepped out into the corridor to look, there was no one there but a necklace. It was Andy's. Hayabu knew Andy had eavesdropped but was not angry at all, and the next morning he kicked him into the swimming pool and then returned it. As Hayabu was about to leave, Andy asked about his goal. He wanted to kill off all ordinary people and create a place where Aspers were no longer controlled. Andy asked Hayabu whether that was truly necessary. After hearing it, Hayabu's expression changed completely, going cold and emotionless, and Hayabu wanted to know whether Andy would stop him then. Andy did not answer, and that night he reassembled the gun he had not used in a long time. And after everything he decided to carry out the mission his superiors had entrusted to him, to seize the catastrophe. At the same time Andy would also inform Babel of this operation. He wanted his superiors to apply pressure so that they would not deploy the children. They only needed to hold Hayabu back and should not let things go any further. Receiving the information, Babel acted quickly too, and Kaoru badly wanted to set out to capture Hayabu but was stopped by Minamoto. This time only ordinary people would take part in the fight. People usually thought Babel hated Hayabu and therefore wanted to hunt down Pandra. But the truth was entirely different, for in their future simulation device they had seen the catastrophe being sunk, and Hayabu dying in that event. To keep that tragedy from happening, Babel had poured nearly all of their resources into capturing all of Pandra. This time was their last chance, and Minamoto could not fail in this operation. Finally, the moment of the deal arrived, and Hayabu led everyone to the port to block a vehicle and threaten it. But surprisingly, inside the vehicle there were no goods but Minamoto waiting, with Babel's people lying in ambush all around. A barrage of gun muzzles pointed in the direction of Hayabu and Pandra's people, and someone used a smoke bomb to mislead Hayabu, creating an opening for Andy to return to the ship. Hayabu looked as though he had not noticed the problem, but in that brief instant he had understood everything. So Magi snatched Minamoto's gun, and Hayabu flew up into the air wanting to leave. Kaoru stood waiting up in the air, and despite Minamoto's order not to take part in the fight, She had run here only to announce the event that Babel had foreseen. Surprisingly, Hayabu already knew about it. From the time he sneaked into Babel, Hayabu had known everything, and he also understood the state of his own body, which was already nearing its limit. But Hayabu could not let anything happen to the catastrophe. It was the future of the Espers. After hearing this, Kaoru immediately struck out to subdue Hayabu, but he quickly released his limiter, and with just a flick of his hand, Hayabu sent Kaoru flying, driving her whole body hard against the wall and dragging her along a long stretch. Under such pressure, Kaoru fell unconscious, and the battle ended in the most anticlimactic way possible. Hayabu carried her up to a safe building and then whispered, "The actions of adults are for adults to handle. Children had best stay here." Before leaving, on the ship, Andy had called his superiors, and now the man could send people to come and recover Aiko. Because there were only children here, Andy did not want military forces moving in. The call had just ended when Andy heard Hayabu's voice behind him. He was utterly shocked that Hayabu had uncovered his identity and his plan. Hayabu had not actually suspected him. It was only after that baffling disappearance earlier that he understood everything behind it. Hayabu would not let Andy take Aigo away, much less let him leave this place. Hayabu wanted Andy, like himself, to stay here, because he looked very much like someone Hayabu had once known in the past. The person who had turned Hayabu from someone who wanted to use ESP to serve mankind into someone who now wanted to wipe humanity out. To understand why Hayabu said that, we have to go back nearly 100 years, to a time when he was truly just a kid. Hayabu's life could be called unfortunate and tragic from having superpowers within him. And Hayabu's power was no ordinary thing, even stronger than Fujiko's, who was said to possess the strongest known source of ESP at that time. Hayabu originally lived abroad, and when his father died he moved in with Fujiko's family, because the two men's fathers had been extremely close friends. They were also leading experts in the research on ESP. That was the reason Babel, no matter what, wanted to save Hayabu at all costs. After living here for a while, Hayabu felt things were quite good. Although his father had long since been laid in the ground and exhumed, Hayabu still kept the habit of writing letters to him. For some reason, his father had not wanted his son to use his superpower. It was a superfluous thing not needed in life, and Hayabu did not need to use it only to become a hero in everyone's eyes. While Hayabu was absent-mindedly recalling those old days, Fujiko came in and snatched the letter, thinking this featherless little chick of a boy had a lover across the continent, so she was very curious about its contents. In the heat of the moment, Hayabu let his true power show and snatched the letter back, and Fujiko was utterly surprised by this, for although it lasted only an instant, that feeling of being overpowered did not please her one bit. Fujiko then pinned Hayabu down, wanting to grab the letter back. Right at that moment, two officers walked in along with Fujiko's father. One of them was Utsumi, whom we already know, and the other was the captain of the Imperial Fiji's army, who came here with the aim of inviting Hayabu and Fujiko to join a squad of special warriors serving the country. Both Hayabu and Fujiko had terrifyingly strong superpowers, and to keep living an ordinary life, subject to others' control, would truly be a waste. But if they served in the military, the two of them could live the life they wanted without having to obey anyone's wishes. Hearing this, Hayabu was filled with anticipation. He really was an innocent kid back then. Although he possessed the most dominant power at the time, Hayabu had never had any intention of burning the neighbors' houses or wrecking the village. On the contrary, he wanted to use his ability to help people. He was deep in thought when Fujiko stopped him, for to her these people had no good intentions at all. They only wanted to exploit their powers as if they were weapons of war. Living a life like that was no different from being a tool. Fujiko pulled Hayabu out of the room, unintentionally dropping the letter, and Utsumi bent down to pick it up, and through his perception learned that Hayabu's father had been deeply opposed to the use of powers, so he feared Hayabu would not join this squad. Fujiko's father was the same, if the kids did not want to, as a researcher who wanted Espers to live as humans, and as the guardian of the two children, he would not force them if they did not agree. Hearing this, Fiji smiled. He was certain that Hayabu and Fujiko would definitely agree, because no one with power within them would leave it unused. It was a temptation impossible to overcome. Just as Fiji said, the next morning the two of them appeared in the gathering room of the ESP squad. From then on, Hayabu's life veered onto a completely different path. A year later, the ESP squad officially debuted within the military, and this group consisted of quite a few people with special powers, each with a strength in a different area. Some, with bare hands, launched flames so large they burned an entire tank to a crisp. Some possessed the ability to move faster than the flight speed of a bullet, and some could control objects from afar. Each ability left ordinary people gaping as they watched and likening them to monsters. Everyone in the squad looked cool, until Fujiko, who was sleeping sprawled out in a way that made the whole auditorium burst out laughing. In that situation, Fujiko grew furious, intending to grab a knife and stab the guy who made the introduction video. Luckily, the people in the squad stopped her. Otherwise, with her hot temper that feared no one, Fujiko really would have cut off the man's privates. While Fujiko was indignantly asking what Hayabu thought she should do, he had split off from the group to go pick up a watch that had been repaired. On the way back, he accidentally bumped into a policeman, and seeing the luxurious, flashy outfit he wore, the man suddenly grew irritated as if his late mother's money had all been eaten up. And so he began lecturing him. Seeing that scene from afar, Fujiko did not hesitate to curse back. Those with houses fronting the street and big-shot fathers with money could buy nice clothes to wear, and Hayabu's family had never licked or cut anything off the man's family, so he had no right to lecture him. The policeman even pulled out social morality to pressure her, saying this was a time when Japanese people should stand together rather than dressing in such a discriminatory way. Fujiko did not care in the slightest, cursing him so hard he could not wipe his face fast enough. Unable to win the argument, the policeman wanted to fight, never imagining he would be kicked by Fujiko, his whole body flying backward into another person, knocking him down before he passed out cold. Seeing the crowd gather from afar, Utsumi and the others knew something was wrong, and indeed it was. The person knocked down was a soldier belonging to the Navy. From that, they were all disciplined and locked up in the barracks, but Fujiko's father did not accept that order. It was clearly the other side that had picked a fight and wanted to throw the first punch, and to lose the fight and then go report it to one's superiors. Only a pack mongrel would do such a thing. The high-ranking lot were the same. They handed out punishment clearly because they did not like the ESP squad and so went out of their way to pressure it. Just as he said, a little later someone came to reprimand them and demand the SP squad be disbanded, and Fiji, standing across from him, refused without hesitation. It would be a terrible waste. If the Spurs were used for the right purposes, even the whole combined fleet would not be a match for them. Fiji did not just speak with his mouth. He knew the Navy was requesting an unbelievably advanced Air Force device, and once that thing was completed, his Spurs would fight it. If they lost, he would accept disbanding the squad, but in the case of a win, his superiors would no longer have the right to interfere with the ESP squad. The Aspire group outside, among whom one knew the entire content of the meeting through a bird. At first some intended to throw a tear gas bomb to spite the wretched dog leaders. But once they heard Fiji's challenge, they began to grow excited and full of anticipation. It was time to show those chickens just how strong they really were. That was the agreement, and that advanced aircraft would take a month to manufacture and assemble. That was why the ESP squad had some time to train. Fiji gathered everyone together and announced the one-on-one duel with that super advanced aircraft. This was a match completely disadvantageous for the ESP side, for the opponent was armed with the best vehicle currently available, while the one fighting that battle was only equipped with a gun loaded with paint rounds. Just hearing it sounded difficult, and upon hearing it Fujiko not only was not afraid, but on the contrary stepped forward to ask to take the fight. She felt guilty that things had gone this far because of her, and in terms of power and responsibility, no one was more suitable than her. Hearing this, Fiji declined, for to him the most suitable person for this match was none other than Hayabu. Hearing this, Fujiko was a little surprised, but now was not the time to argue. She could only make the most of every bit of time to train Hayabu. So the next day, there were two people flying about up in the air. Hayabu had very good combat instincts, knowing to use the dazzling glare of the sun to mislead his opponent and then attack. But his marksmanship was rather poor, with his eyes bulging and crossed somehow, missing every shot. The opponent, on the other hand, shot him down by pulling the trigger just once. In a short time, Hayabu had trained a great deal, his body covered in bruises, his whole self aching non-stop. Even though they were paint rounds, the damage was not low at all. While Hayabu was bathing, Fujiko walked in from outside, and although she was still young, her certificate of being a good person made him quite embarrassed. Fujiko did not feel the same way. She felt rather uncomfortable that she could not protect Hayabu, leaving an 8-year-old kid to shoulder this heavy responsibility. After that, Fujiko went to find Fiji to speak about her resolve. She wanted to become stronger so that Hayabu could live in peace. Hearing this, Fiji told her it was just Fujiko's ego, and if she truly wanted what was good for Hayabu, then she had to find every way to make him stronger. That was why, right now, Fujiko could do nothing but encourage Hayabu that he absolutely must win this match. Hayabu was the same. He was determined to win, a victory for Fujiko and his comrades, and also his own affirmation to his father. On the day of the decisive battle, so that the opponent would not be caught off guard when Hayabu teleported over and defeated him, Fujiko's group flew near the aircraft to give a heads up. Seeing Fujiko, the pilot suddenly grew angry. He was precisely the person she had kicked down, and that defeat had made him looked down upon and shunned by everyone. The pilot tilted the aircraft to one side to make her fall, and then charged straight toward Hayabu. The two of them began their battle. Hayabu took the lead, flying in front, with the aircraft trailing behind firing rounds in attack. One would think Hayabu's superpower was strong enough to easily leave the aircraft behind. But this was the most advanced combat aircraft currently in existence, with a speed too fast to describe. And no matter how hard Hayabu tried, he could not stretch the distance. On the contrary, he was being tailed closely and approached. If this situation kept up, Hayabu would surely lose. Far off in the distance, everyone watching that scene began to worry. Only Fiji did not. He knew that because of emotional issues, Hayabu's power was being held back. Recalling the training, Fiji had shown Hayabu a way to claim victory in the battle. But Hayabu had offered a different idea. For to him every warrior had a weak point, and that was their head. If Hayabu could fire a single shot into the pilot's head, minimizing the damage to the aircraft and defeating them, then it would be a victory of enormous persuasive power. But the current situation was extremely hard to call. Hayabu was not only gradually being caught up to but also growing slower and slower, feeling as if something were dragging his legs back. Hayabu remembered his father's words. The man had once been someone immersed in ESP research, which led to the death of his mother. From that he had fiercely opposed Hayabu using his power. He feared his remaining son would also die because of it. Fiji understood his feelings too, and before the battle, Hayabu had been unable to sleep from thinking of his father's words. Fiji told Hayabu not to dwell on it, that he was in a different place now, a place where ESP could be used as a means to make everyone's life better. Hayabu should use his power to become whoever he wanted to be, whoever or wherever that might be. In the midst of the battle, Hayabu came to understand this, for he was an Esper, so how could he ever live an ordinary life? The moment his thinking opened up, his speed suddenly surged sharply, shooting forward. As the pilot was caught off guard by this change, Hayabu had already moved into position and waited, and when the aircraft turned around and charged straight ahead, Hayabu fired the shot he had spoken of. It passed through the propeller and drove straight into the windshield. Needless to say, the outcome of the match was decided. Hayabu won. But right at that moment, they received word that a submarine had intruded into Japan's waters. Hayabu was ordered to equip live ammunition and head there immediately. The others also rushed off, and the group observed from afar. The submarine, not hiding its identity, surfaced and fired something. Someone tried asking who they were and where they came from, and that group, without a word, swung their gun muzzles toward the Esper. Luckily, he managed to teleport back to his original position in time, and Fiji announced that they should not use force against this submarine, as it might be the American military in the process of carrying out a special mission. At present, the diplomacy between the two countries was hotter than ever, so the less friction the better. From everyone's view, they were closely tailing 3 dolphins. When the dolphins leaped up, a stream of thought crying for help radiated out from them. "We only want to take refuge. We have no intention of starting a fight." Catching this stream of thought, the group knew the dolphins were also Espers. From the submarine, 3 torpedoes fired toward the dolphins. Immediately, 1 dolphin was shot dead on the spot, while the 1 remaining torpedo was still closely pursuing the 2 dolphins. Seeing that scene, Hayabu could not hold back and lunged forward. His speed not fast enough, but luckily a Navy aircraft shot over to help right at that moment. And thanks to it, Hayabu was able to overtake the torpedo and snap off its launching device, then use his spatial teleportation ability to stop the terrible explosion under the sea. Seeing that scene, the American military retreated, and everyone held their breath looking down at the surface of the sea. When Hayabu reappeared without a single injury, Fiji too took joy in this. Upon returning, Hayabu could not contain his joy and hugged Fiji, the person who had helped him overcome his psychological trauma. He was also praised by everyone as the hero of the operation. Among the group escorting the dolphins, it warned everyone that they were very close to the god of death. He did not understand this until America dropped 2 bombs on Japan, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki were completely destroyed. Hayabu had grown up by then and wanted to go into battle, but Fiji stopped him, for he was the only one in the squad still intact, and Japan at that point had surrendered unconditionally, so joining the fight was already impossible. What surprised Hayabu even more was that Fiji had turned the gun muzzle toward him and said that, from the prophetic ability of the 2 dolphins, Fiji knew that in the future there would be a great many Spurs, and Hayabu would be the one to lead them in destroying the world. To prevent that scenario from happening, Fiji had struck at him. How could Fiji have known that it was precisely that act that would make the prophecy come true? On the Blood Moon night, Hayabu did not die but sprang up and killed Fiji in turn, the rage within him at being betrayed by the person he trusted most having formed a flame of fury. It drove Hayabu to kill off everyone who had stabbed him in the back. That was the reason there was such a negative Hayabu as the present one. And he showed no mercy at all as he controlled objects to strike straight at Andy. Andy, seeing this, could not help but be surprised, wondering why within the range of his ESP nullification Hayabu could still use his power. And that was because he used his power from outside to create propulsion for the objects. And when they drew near Andy, he did indeed lose control of them. But the momentum and motion of the objects still remained, still enough to take Andy's life, falling into a deadlock. Andy could only draw his gun and threaten, but Hayabu was not worried at all. On the contrary, he felt that Andy was truly weak. A gun was for shooting, not for intimidating. Andy threw his gun forward and lunged in wanting to fight Hayabu hand to hand, but he quickly teleported away to dodge. Outside, the leader's voice rang out, warning all the people in the ship that they were obliged to cooperate, or else pay the price. The monsters who could destroy the world had to be subdued, and letting them operate freely up until now had already been beyond the government's endurance. The moment Hayabu heard this, the blood in his body seemed to boil and seethe as if heated by a flame. He stopped paying attention to Andy and teleported outside, and unlike what the leader had told Andy, outside the sky was thick with flying devices like flies and mosquitoes, and far off were dense rows of naval ships. And with such density and scale, this operation was no different from an all-out war between 2 nations. It was truly terrifying, and to keep the catastrophe from suffering heavy losses and being completely destroyed by the flying devices, Hayabu could only face hundreds and thousands of aircraft in the sky alone. One would think that was all the enemy had, but no, the unmanned devices were only there to draw Hayabu in, and when he was distracted up in the sky, military helicopters came over, and from them quite a few people jumped down and went straight into the ship. The moment they entered, they did not hesitate or waver in the slightest as they targeted the children. But luckily there was still Patty on the ship, someone with a combat ability to protect the kids. She bought enough time for the kids to run to the place they had been guided to for evacuation beforehand. Once the children had left, Patty too fell into a weak position when the opponent had a miniaturized ECM device, and with this device she was completely suppressed, unable to do anything but flee. On Yujiri's side, the little girl, hearing the commotion, went out looking for Hayabu but did not find him. The squirrel, sensing something was wrong, began searching for the remaining crew members. Right at that moment, Yujiri heard a noise. Although the little girl quickly hid, she was still discovered by the leader. Yujiri tried to run away, but before a group of people with ECM, determined to catch her at all costs, Yujiri could hardly escape. While being seized, Yujiri unleashed an illusion that drove a soldier insane. Immediately they increased the operating frequency of the ECM, and Yujiri gradually felt pain and then fainted. On the squirrel's side, it had found Andy and, thinking he was a traitor, wanted to attack, but with just one smack, it was knocked out and lay on the ground. He did not know what to do in this situation either except leave. Once he got outside and stood face to face with a commander, Andy changed his attitude, because behind the man was Yujiri, bound no differently from a dangerous criminal. Andy asked him why, when he had clearly promised not to let military forces take part in this operation. The commander simply replied that the monsters needed to be monitored and subdued, and for the sake of world peace, this was the only way. Andy shouted that the little girl was not a monster. He had been observing her all this time. Spurs were almost no different from ordinary people, and it was the discriminatory and hostile attitude of ordinary people that turned Spurs into monsters. That was the reason this battle had broken out. Andy drew his gun wanting to threaten the man, but the commander was quicker, pulling a gun from his coat pocket and firing straight into Andy's heart. and he fell just like Hayabu in the past, shot down by the very person he trusted. Switching over to Meiji's group, the two sides were fighting Babel when Minamoto spoke up to stop them, explaining to Meiji's group that Babel's purpose was to keep Pandra from confronting America. But now it was too late. Babel was under pressure from the government and could not aid Pandra, and what Minamoto could do at this point was let the three of them go. They quickly returned to the ship through a teleportation gate and gathered with those who had not been captured. Here Patty and the children were temporarily safe. Momiji and Patty would take the kids to the teleportation gate first, while Meiji and you would go find the others remaining on the ship. Up in the air, Hayabu was fighting fiercely against the unmanned aircraft, and he looked rather worn out now. It was not that the opponent was too strong, but that Hayabu had now weakened to the extreme, and after fighting for just a while his body sent out wave after wave of aching pain. After each round of attacks, Hayabu had to stop and gasp for breath to recover his strength. When he looked toward the catastrophe, Hayabu saw the ship being severely ravaged, and from inside two children ran out, with a soldier in the air aiming a laser sight straight at them. Luckily, when the man pulled the trigger, Meiji had rushed out in time to protect the children and destroy the helicopter. In that moment, Hayabu remembered the comrades who had been massacred in the past, a deep, profound pain that made him collapse in that instant. Meiji grabbed Hayabu and shouted that if he did not protect this ship, then no one could. It was precisely those words that made Hayabu pull himself together and once again charge up into the air. This time he released the seal on his power, his hand condensing an energy sword that he slashed forward. After destroying a barrage of aircraft, Hayabu still did not stop but went on to unleash much lightning and fire energy, culminating in when he fused the two types of energy into the sword and then fired out a destructive beam of light that struck down a warship. That seemed to be the limit of Hayabu's body too, for after that blow he could only stand in the air, breathing out rapid breath after breath, and far off, a barrage of warships began releasing warheads. Hayabu stood before the ship using his hands to block that rain of missiles. But after only a while, the missile tips began penetrating the barrier. Andy below had not died, for the badge Hayabu had given him had saved his life. Andy did not even have time to rejoice, because up ahead, Hayabu lost his state of energy burst and fell from the sky, followed by hundreds of missiles flying in and exploding all over the catastrophe. Andy crossed through the storm of missiles, heading toward Hayabu. In just that brief instant, the once grand and majestic catastrophe had been struck down, its hull bursting into flames and then sinking into the cold, bottomless deep sea. Beneath the surface, Hayabu, exhausted, fell into a hazy state, and he involuntarily recalled his father's words. It seemed the man had been right to stop his son from using ESP, that it was not a gift but a calamity for Espers. There would be no place for Espers to brazenly display their power before the eyes of ordinary people. Just as Hayabu was about to accept his father's words, Andy lunged over and grabbed his hand. For some reason Hayabu closed his eyes, perhaps because he felt reassured or simply because he was exhausted and fainted. The moment Andy carried Hayabu up to the surface, Fujiko was already there, having come here in defiance of the government's orders. Truly a good older sister who, no matter what, still saved her younger brother. That day's event ended just like that, but it still left quite a few ripples. Minamoto had to sit down and talk with a government agency, who wanted nothing other than to seal off the news, as if yesterday's incident had never happened. The catastrophe had never been sunk. No battle had ever broken out. That was America's wish. Fujiko did not directly take part in the meeting but called in from afar, and she did not waste words, going straight to the point. Babel would completely keep everything quiet as they wished, but from then on the government was not to interfere with any of Babel's actions. In simple terms, from here on Babel would be an independent organization separate from the government. Fujiko even threatened that if they refused, she would expose all the dirty things they had done in the past. Before someone like Fujiko, they could not stand firm and had no choice but to agree. Hayabu was currently in Fujiko's old house, and according to the data Minamoto had obtained, Hayabu had truly weakened greatly. Even if he woke up, he would have to rest for a very long time before he could return to peak condition. And that was a hypothesis under the most ideal case at that. Luckily, when Hayabu woke up he was aware of his own situation and did not directly leave, and Fujiko wanted to learn from him why America had acted so recklessly this time. Something that was almost calculated as a provocation against Japan, enough to create a war between the two nations just to sink the catastrophe. Hayabu did not at all say what Fujiko wanted to hear, but only said he wanted to meet Andy. Andy was not present here at the moment. He was at Babel having the biochip removed from his eye. After everything, Andy knew that the organization he served was no different from a dog that ate crap and a person who kicked the chamber pot to eat porridge then kicked the bowl. There was no reason at all for him to serve an organization like that. What Andy wanted to do now was meet Hayabu. Kaoru's group, through the girl beside her, had learned Hayabu's location, and Andy immediately asked to come along, even though he himself risked dying instantly upon facing Hayabu. He did not care in the slightest. On the way, Andy asked why Kaoru seemed very worried about Hayabu. She did not know either, for back when they all met him everyone was still very small. Hayabu had been very gentle with them, and Kaoru did not know why he was so certain that she was the queen of the Aspers of the future. Kaoru did not want it to be that way, for what she aimed for was simply to build a world where both humans and Aspers could coexist with one another. Unable to find an answer, they went straight to Hayabu's place, and he was very happy to see Kaoru, but meeting Andy was the most important thing of all. Setting aside the flame of fury in his heart, Hayabu asked Andy who that voice in Igo's room had been. Andy did not know. He only recounted the story of how he had met the supreme leader of America's ESP Investigation Bureau. Andy's ESP nullification ability made him both hated by Aspers and disliked by humans. But that man had told him it was a gift, that God would show him how to use it properly. The moment he heard these words, Hayabu was so agitated that he fainted right on the spot. Because those words could only have been spoken by Fiji, the one who had shot Hayabu in the heart and head a century before. Fujiko too was extremely astonished to hear this information, that the bastard was somehow still alive. The one nearly shot dead by him was not only Hayabu but Fujiko as well. Hayabu's resurrection had been because of his fury toward the traitor, while the true child of luck was actually Fujiko, and even now she understood why she had managed to escape on that night of tragedy. In order to establish Babel, she had been forced to set aside her hatred for those who had once betrayed her in the ESP squad back then and let them join. That was the real reason Hayabu had massacred quite a few members of Babel. But toward Minamoto or Sakaki he had never raised any killing intent. But the important matter now was that Hayabu did not have much time, and to save him, Kaoru had risked a blood transfusion to carry out a special method of treatment. It could succeed or fail, and luckily Hayabu had recovered as well as everyone had hoped. Now all he needed was to rest with full focus, and returning to his peak was entirely possible. But Hayabu did not wait at all. He had put on his familiar outfit and left. Sensing this, everyone split up to search and stop him, and Kaoru wanted Hayabu to leave his hatred behind. Babel would find a way to save the captured Aspers, and what Hayabu needed to do now was stay calm and think about everyone's future. But Hayabu could not do it. He was a man of the present, and the future could only be handed over to Kaoru. After hearing those words, she could only helplessly sink to her knees, watching Hayabu's figure leave. As Andy came out, what everyone could do at this point was ask Andy to use his power to support Hayabu. He wanted to do that too, so he drove a car to block Hayabu's path, and Andy simply said that if he could not save Yujiri, then he could not be at peace. If they were going the same way, then hop in the car, and Hayabu was silent for a while before throwing the necklace pendant back to Andy, and the two of them once again traveled together. The target they set their sights on was none other than that damned superior who had stabbed Andy in the back time and again. The moment he returned home, Hayabu was already there, and just as he meant to turn his car around and flee, Andy was behind him pointing a gun straight at him. Now there was nowhere on earth to run. Kid. He was utterly surprised too, for if Andy was not dead, then the entire American ESP investigation organization would have to face two vengeful ghosts. Truly an immeasurable disaster for the organization. Even if Andy came back, so what? For to him Andy was just a lonely soul who belonged nowhere and so always drifted, abandoned by the military before and now betrayed by America's ESP Investigation Bureau. Truly a tragedy. Waiting for Andy to be distracted, he then grabbed the gun wanting to destroy himself so that Hayabu could not extract information, and a bang rang out. But strangely he did not die. When the gun muzzle was pulled away from his head, right at that spot a bullet was spinning and surging forward yet still hanging in place. Hayabu had reacted faster and stopped the opponent's intent to self-destruct. At this point, he knew there was nothing he could do but confess what he knew, where Yujiri was being held. On Fujiko's side, they did not rush to act but began investigating America's ESP organization, which had indeed been driven and developed by a person of Japanese descent. Hayabu's deduction had been completely correct. On the way to the base, the man let the two of them know that Yujiri was not originally an ordinary orphan. The little girl was the product of an inhumane experiment, of course illegal, and not recognized by any legitimate agency. They had selected a woman who was a high-level Esper and then had her give birth to many children to produce powerful natural-born Espers. Yujiri was the fruit of that experiment. But the experimental facility had been destroyed during an incident when an Esper lost control, and they thought Yujiri had died, never imagining the little girl had been rescued and raised by Pandra. On Monarch's side, Sophie had investigated all the way to an old orphanage and learned of this matter. As for controlling Espers, America was developing a plan to create a biological collar, a device that would force Espers to obey the rules humans set. And in the future scenario, they would be no different from dogs with collars around their necks. Oppressing Espers like that, how could it not make them hateful and want to wipe out humanity? The two of them just followed the superior without knowing that, before entering the base, his ring had flashed once. This trip was nothing other than a painstakingly prepared trap. Upon reaching an empty room, Fiji spoke up in greeting, and the moment he heard the man's voice, Hayabu could hardly control his emotions and grew furious. Fiji was not like that. He projected a screen for everyone to see the scenario of the future. The current state of a sky hazy and full of smoke and dust, fires and chaos everywhere. That was caused by the rebellion of the Espers, who had turned Earth into an extremely dangerous place. To prevent that, Fiji was willing to pay any price. Above all, through Igo he had learned that Kaoru would be the future leader of the Espers, and Fiji let Hayabu know he would not let that happen, that he would do everything to make her die before she grew up. The moment Fiji finished speaking, the man beside him suddenly lunged over and grabbed Hayabu, and up ahead a barrage of flying devices rushed out, and the Ecom all around was activated too, leaving him with his hands and feet bound. Luckily Andy reacted in time and shot the Ecom devices to pieces so Hayabu could raise a shield in time, and the man unluckily took a bullet and died on the spot. And Andy also reacted nimbly and shot the lock right at the door before it could bolt shut. Andy stood up and helped Hayabu forward. Everywhere in this place there was Ecom and unmanned devices equipped with Ecom, which was why Hayabu could not use his power to wipe them all out in one go. If he released his limiter, Hayabu would have to bear an enormous pressure, a waste of power. Luckily Hayabu could still use a bit of his ability to form a weapon for Andy and then asked him to clear out this lot. Andy was truly at a loss for words. They were that numerous, yet he was given only 2 batons and told to handle it himself. Handle it on faith. That was the case, but Andy got used to the weapon and then lunged forward, giving each one a baton. Although the cold weapon was not too good in this situation, Andy's close combat ability was very strong. Thanks to this, they cleared this checkpoint for the time being. That was only temporary. For the moment they finished off this lot, another lot came pouring and firing their guns straight at the two of them. Andy got Hayabu into an elevator, sensing that there was less Ecom above so they could use teleportation to leave here. That was the thought, but the elevator stopped halfway, and they had no choice but to get out. To avoid holding Andy back, Hayabu also created a sword for himself. Although an Esper, his close combat ability was not bad at all. As Andy lunged forward, fighting left and right to clear the way, behind them a few that slipped through the net lunged straight at Hayabu. Hayabu swung a clean stroke of his sword and sliced the flying devices in two, and seeing that, Andy felt more at ease and charged forward. Reaching a more spacious floor, there were quite a few Ecom devices around. Andy used his gun to shoot them to pieces to keep Hayabu from being suppressed, but at the same time, they also released quite a few light particles. The moment Hayabu touched it, he knew it was a crystal that disrupted spatial perception, through which he would be unable to sense the surrounding space and teleport. Also at that moment, a barrage of unmanned flying devices along with soldiers ran out and surrounded the two of them. This was truly an inescapable trap for them both. And no matter how hard Andy and Hayabu fought, they could not create an opening to push forward. In a moment of gasping for breath, Hayabu took hold of the badge, wanting to release his power. Andy sensed it and stopped him. Using it in the current situation truly was a waste, and he told Hayabu to just go forward, while he himself would stay here and try to clean everything up. Andy wanted to do this as a way to atone for his mistakes. Hayabu only smiled and said that a person who could not get past lies and betrayal would find it hard to trust anyone. Hayabu had let that matter go long ago. Just as the two were about to lunge into a fight to the death with the flying devices, the glass on the roof suddenly shattered, and from it Magi's group of 3 jumped in, and one after another they used their powers to smash the flying devices to pieces, and the soldiers could not hold out long against them either. Thanks to Magi's timely intervention, Hayabu and Andy left here smoothly. Facing you and the squirrel, Andy felt a little awkward. He did not waste words but said he only wanted to save Yujiri. And just as the squirrel wanted to drag out Andy's whole lineage to curse, you threw a punch. With just a single punch, you let go of the matter of Andy's betrayal, and they were comrades again heading toward New York. The place said to have Yujiri there, to bring the little girl back. But there was an awkward problem here, in that when she met everyone again, Yujiri seemed not to recognize who they were and struck out to subdue them. Under the little girl's power, apart from Hayabu and Andy, hardly anyone could resist. In New York, there was an inauguration ceremony for the new mayor, a man trying to build a peaceful life between ordinary people and Espers, but according to Igo's prediction, today was the day he would be assassinated by an Esper, and the period of peace between the two sides would vanish too. Because of this, many countries would begin building policies to suppress Espers, which was an opportunity for Fiji to strike at Kaoru. The peace needed for that future to come about was none other than Yujiri, and as Andy was on his way chasing the little girl to where the new mayor was being inaugurated, he was stopped by soldiers, who were the very people working for Fiji, waiting here to capture him. Right at that moment they suddenly fell unconscious, and behind him were Minamoto and Sakaki, the two of whom had come here to stop Fiji's plan. Babel had a connection with America's independent intelligence agency, and so had already learned of everything. The only hope for humans and Espers at this point could only be Andy. He quickly ran inside, and Yujiri was standing at the highest point, her whole body erupting with violent energy as she launched a blow straight at the mayor. Luckily, in that moment, Andy made it over in time to stand in front of the man and block the attack. The assassination of the mayor thus failed, and Fiji was not too disappointed either, ordering Yujiri to kill them all. Receiving the order, she expanded her illusion domain, and a barrage of citizens, seeing the illusions, lost their awareness and wanted to attack Andy and Minamoto's group. Not only ordinary people, the Espers too gradually fell into a state of losing control and causing chaos. The situation at this point was extremely bad for everyone, and Andy below was surrounded by citizens with no way to get to Yujiri. And if this situation kept up, then the suppression of Espers in the future would be nearly impossible to avoid. Luckily, up above, Hayabu appeared in time, and seeing the one who loved and doted on her, Yujiri still did not recognize him and attacked. The current attack was still not enough to have an effect on him. Hayabu only swung his hand once and was able to nullify the illusion. Seeing this, Yujiri did not give up. On the contrary, she erupted into an even more powerful illusion zone. At first it only covered one area, then it spread out across the whole city, and New York fell completely into chaos, the situation now no longer within Babel's control. Even Hayabu fell into the illusion, where the opponent simulated a person no different from himself, and the two sides traded blows back and forth. And because he was fighting himself, Hayabu could not find a breakthrough point either, at most only fighting to a draw. The illusion fled into the darkness, and then created images of the past, the time when he shot down the aircraft. After that came his comrades, and seeing them, Hayabu could not bring himself to attack them even though before his eyes were only fakes. They reproached Hayabu, asking why only he got to live while they did not. And the voice of his father from years ago came flooding back too, the man once again affirming Hayabu's mistake. Had he not listened to that person, there would have been none of the misfortune and tragedy of today. No one would have had to die. Hayabu knew it was only an illusion, but this feeling of pain and anguish was not fake. After a stretch of pain so severe it left him drained, Hayabu began to undo his seal, and this time the energy did not simply erupt. It expanded and drove away the darkness that Yujiri had created. Through it Hayabu entered Yujiri's mind, and counting it up, the little girl truly was pitiful, for during one experiment, having lost control, Yujiri had killed everyone inside. Even though it was all in the past, Yujiri was still afraid and did not dare make contact with anyone. And seeing the innocent children and the kind-hearted Sophie, Yujiri knew she could not stay here, otherwise she would only bring grief to others. So Yujiri left, wandering all over the world alone, with no companion and no one to care for her. Yujiri thought she would be like that forever until Hayabu appeared. He did not fear, shun, or avoid her, but told Yujiri to come to Pandra, where there was a family, people willing to shelter Yujiri without expecting anything in return. When Yujiri took Hayabu's hand was also the moment the illusion darkness was nullified. Hayabu's complexion at that point was not good, looking as if he were about to be drained to the end. But he still tried to erase the symbol on Yujiri's back. The moment he finished doing this, the energy from Hayabu sent Yujiri flying backward. Andy, coming up just then, lunged over and caught the little girl. When the two of them looked ahead, the elemental energies within Hayabu erupted violently, so powerful that even the suppression badge on his clothes shattered to pieces. Hayabu at that point truly did not know what to do but sigh. Holding out until now had already been his final limit. Hayabu had no regret at all. He had fought for the present and successfully protected the future. The place where Kaoru would build the vision of peace between the two beings, Esper and human. As Hayabu awaited the moment his body would crumble and then vanish, Andy still did not give up. And Yujiri was the same, the little girl grabbing the leg of Andy's pants as they went forward together. What Andy wanted was a complete future, a place where even Hayabu could live out a whole life, rather than the incomplete picture of the present. Disregarding the elemental energy surging out furiously, threatening to blow his whole body away, Andy pushed forward, concentrating his entire spirit to carry out the sealing of Hayabu's power as it swept everything away like a storm. And Andy's pupils in an instant turned from gold to black. What Hayabu did not expect was that through Andy's effort, the energy was truly gradually stabilizing and then vanishing completely. By the time it thoroughly returned to his body, he still could not believe Andy had managed to do it. Just like that, everything ended in the most perfect way, with no one having to leave. Hayabu also found Fiji, who was not afraid, but even looked forward to him coming to kill him. Strangely enough, Hayabu did not do so. He only went and took the man's memories and soul, leaving Fiji to live as one already dead in this world. People still mistakenly thought Hayabu fought out of hatred, but his ultimate purpose was still the future. A future where Espers would not have to endure the oppression, the disdainful and discriminatory gaze of humans.